Part 1. The building didn't know I owned it yet. That was the point. I came in through the side lobby at 12 minutes past 9 on a Tuesday, in a jacket I'd owned for 6 years, and shoes that had never once been photographed. No car announcement, no name at the desk. The kind of man a security guard waves through because stopping me would take more effort than I look worth. That is the whole trick, if you want it. Look like nothing. People tell the truth in front of nothing. The receptionist didn't ask who I was. She was on a call about a catering order for a Thursday event and gave me the small, automatic nod you give a delivery. I nodded back and kept walking. 2 seconds of eye contact, zero curiosity. She'd remember me tomorrow only if someone made her. The lower corridor smelled like burnt coffee and new carpet. Someone had spent money on the carpet and not the coffee. I filed that. You learn a company faster from its small budget fights than from any quarterly report. A man in shirt sleeves passed me carrying a laptop and a lanyard swinging loose. "Morning," he said on reflex, already past. "Morning," I said, and that was the entire conversation, and it was exactly the right length. There was a nameplate on the first desk past the corridor. Eleanor, department manager, brushed steel, angled just enough to catch the hallway light. Below it, a lanyard looped over the monitor arm. The access badge turned face out. I read it once, in passing, the way you read a street sign you already know leads home. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. I just needed the name to have a face later. Her desk told me more than the nameplate did. A row of awards lined up front-facing, angled at the aisle. Not at the chair, trophies arranged for the people walking by, not for the person who earned them. A calendar blocked in color. A framed photo turned slightly outward. Everything on that desk was pointed at an audience. Nothing on it was pointed at work. On the wall by the double doors, a framed poster. 2 climbers, 1 mountain, 1 word in bold sans serif. Excellence. Management culture, established early. I made a note to never read it again. Every failing company I have ever walked into has a poster like that one somewhere near the door. A mountain, a rower, a single triumphant word. And the size of the poster is almost always inversely proportional to the health of the floor. Real excellence does not need to be printed and framed. It just quietly happens at the desks. The poster is what a building hangs on the wall in place of the thing the poster promises. Then the open floor. Mid-morning, and the place was busy in the way offices are busy when someone important is expected. A lot of motion, not much work. Desks in neat rows, monitors angled to look diligent. Somebody had tied a foil balloon to a chair 3 rows in, a limp, happy birthday nobody had the heart to take down. A whiteboard by the far wall still had last week's targets half erased, a ghost of numbers that hadn't been hit. A small cluster near the central island had started drifting into a shape, the loose gravity of people arranging themselves for an audience. I stopped at the edge of it and became furniture. Nobody greeted me. Nobody looked. That is not an insult. That is data. A room that ignores a stranger is a room that has been taught who matters and who doesn't, and I wanted to see who did the teaching. One person clocked me. A young analyst 2 desks down let his eyes travel from my collar to my wrist and stopped there for half a second. The watch. It's the only expensive thing I wear, and I wear it because it does exactly this. It snags on the people who are actually paying attention. He looked away and went back to his screen. Not his job to wonder. Smart kid. Wrong company for him. I keep a running list of them in my head, the watchers, the ones who see the wrong thing at exactly the right time. Most companies grind those people down or drive them out, because a person who notices everything is inconvenient to a person who is performing. But they are the only honest instrument a building owns, and a building that buries them is already rotting from a place its leaders cannot see. The watcher 2 desks down had gone back to his spreadsheet, but I'd caught the flicker, and the flicker was enough. I made the note. The notes always matter later. That is the only reason I keep making them. I stood there and let the floor teach me. Who checked the door, who checked their phone, who laughed a beat too early at nothing. A building tells you everything if you stop performing long enough to hear it. The room had a corner it worshipped. Every few seconds, a head would tilt toward the far glass office where the new CEO sat, a small, unconscious compass check. You can tell exactly how afraid a company is by how often it looks at the same door. This one looked a lot. There was a second tell, quieter. Nobody was actually finishing anything. Emails opened and closed. A report got scrolled top to bottom and back with nothing typed. A whole floor was miming productivity for a man in a glass box. And the man in the glass box was about to learn that a floor which performs for you will also perform against you the instant the wind turns. Performance has no loyalty. It only has an audience. Somewhere down the adjoining hall, heels landed on hard floor. Even, unhurried, deliberate. The sound of someone who has practiced entering a room. The cluster near the island tightened. Phones went face down. A man's laugh rolled ahead of the footsteps, the loose, confident laugh of somebody enjoying his first good week. I didn't move. I'd been in the building 4 minutes, and I already knew more than I'd come to learn. But there was one more data point I wanted, and it was about to walk in wearing very good shoes. She came in half a step ahead of him, which told me who was performing for whom. Victoria. The nameplate made flesh, tailored, precise, a manager who dressed like the version of herself she wanted on a slide. Beside her, taller, newer to the room, a man in a suit that still had the store's confidence in it. Derek. The new CEO, 4 days into the job, wearing the job like a coat he wasn't sure fit. "Everyone's here, good," she announced, to no one and to all of them. "Mr. Halloran wants to see how this floor runs, so let's show him how it runs." Mr. Halloran. So that was the name Derek was going by up here? I filed it next to the appointment letter I'd signed 2 months ago without ever meeting the face. Her eyes went across the floor and landed on me. I watched the read happen in real time. Plain jacket, quiet posture, standing at the edge like I was waiting to fix a printer. Vendor, facilities, nobody. I've been read wrong in a lot of rooms. This was the fastest. "You," she said, not to Derek. Through him. The word was aimed at me, but performed for him. And that distinction is the entire story if you catch it. "Come here." I came. Slowly. A man who fixes printers does not rush. She lifted one foot and set it on the armrest of the nearest chair, presenting the shoe like an exhibit. Black leather, expensive. One faint scuff on the toe from the pavement outside. "These are filthy," she said, to the room now, her voice pitched for the back rows. "There's a cloth on the shelf. Clean them. Some people forget what actual work looks like." She put her foot on the armrest. Impressive commitment to the bit. The floor went quiet in that specific office way, where nobody stops what they're doing, but everybody stops breathing. A woman near the printers froze with a page half out of the tray. 2 men at the standing desks found something urgent on their monitors. A few faces turned toward us. A few very deliberately did not. "Go on," she said, softer, almost kind, the way you'd coax a slow child. "We don't have all morning." I could have said 7 words right there and ended it. I didn't, because if I spoke now, she could still call it a misunderstanding, laugh it off, pull the foot back, recover. I needed the act finished, on the record, with him watching. So I took the cloth off the shelf. It was a microfiber rag, the kind they keep for the glass partitions, still folded in its square. I unfolded it. I knelt. And I began to clean a stranger's shoe in the middle of a room full of people who had decided I was no one. The leather was good. Italian, resoled once, cared for by someone, a cobbler, not her. I worked the scuff on the toe in slow circles. Up close, you could hear the room not breathing, that dense, expensive silence a floor makes when it's watching something it will talk about at lunch. "There," she said, warm now, generous with an audience. "See? Not so hard." Derek laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. That's what mattered later. It was a small, easy, chosen laugh, the sound of a man deciding to back the play because backing it made him look like he belonged. He waited a half beat, the way you wait when you're about to say the line you think will land. "Good help is hard to find, I guess," he said. He held for the room's laugh. He got 3. 3 people gave him what he wanted, quick and thin. The rest of the floor gave him nothing, a silence with weight to it. The silence of people who don't like what they're watching and haven't decided if that matters yet. 3 laughs and a lot of quiet. I filed the number. Numbers are useful. Derek liked the 3 enough to keep going. "That's the thing about standards," he told the room, hands spreading, the little sermon of a man 4 days into believing his own office. "You set them on day 1, or you never set them at all. Victoria gets it. That's why Victoria runs this floor." Victoria got it. She glowed under the sentence like it was a bonus. I finished the toe, buffed the scuff until the leather threw back the ceiling lights, because if you're going to do a thing, you do it correctly, even this, especially this. A job done well is the last thing an enemy expects from a man they've insulted. Then I placed the cloth on the armrest, folded once, squared to the edge, set down the way you set down something you're finished with, not the way you drop something you were forced to hold. And I stood. I didn't hurry. I straightened my jacket, one lapel, then the other, and let my weight settle. It's a small thing, standing. But there is a difference between a man getting up because he's been let go and a man standing because he's decided the meeting is over. And every person in that room felt the difference before a single one of them could have named it. Her foot came off the armrest. She didn't tell it to, it just came down. The watch caught the light as my arm dropped. The young analyst saw it again. So did someone else this time, the woman near the printers, her eyes going from my wrist to my face and staying there, a small question opening behind them. Nobody spoke. The 3 laughs were gone like they'd never happened. The room had shifted under its own feet, and it didn't know why, and not knowing why was the worst part. And in the doorway behind Derek, a woman had appeared. Gray suit, folder under one arm, absolutely still. Rebecca. Head of legal for the parent company, 11 years of my worst days and a few of my best. And she had walked into the room at exactly the moment I stood. She saw me on my feet with a cleaning cloth squared on the armrest beside me. She did not react. She did not introduce herself. She did not so much as tilt her head. Her face stayed as flat as the folder under her arm. That flatness was the first card on the table, and only one person in the room could read it. Derek felt the temperature change before he understood it. That's the tragedy of men like him. The instinct works, but only after the mistake. He glanced at me, this quiet man who had polished a shoe and then failed to look ashamed of it, and something in my not being ashamed bothered him. A man who's been humiliated hunches. He apologizes with his shoulders. I wasn't doing either, and Derek's whole read of the world runs on people doing exactly that. When I didn't, the machine in his head threw an error it couldn't name. So, he did what men like him do. He decided I was safe to ignore. He gave me a short, dismissive look, the kind you give a coat rack you almost mistook for a person, and turned back to his manager. "Right, Victoria," he said, brisk, reassembling his authority out loud. "Where were we?" He was whistling past a graveyard. He just couldn't hear the graveyard yet. I met his eyes for the exact second he was mid-turn. I said nothing. I just let him see that I'd seen him. The joke, the wait for the laugh, the 3 people who gave it to him. Then I let him go. He'd handed me his deniability the moment he opened his mouth, and he didn't even know it was gone. Victoria found her professional smile. She hung it on her face like she was correcting a picture frame, bright and quick, aimed at Derek. "Where we were," she said, in the sunny voice managers use when a room has gone strange, "is the 3rd quarter rollout. I've got the whole floor ready." He should have looked chastened, that smile said. He doesn't. Never mind, cover it, keep moving. But her eyes flicked back to me once. Just once. Fast and annoyed. The annoyance of someone who put on a whole show and can't find the applause where she left it. A man she'd reduced to a servant was standing there with his jacket straight and his hands still. And it itched at her in a place she couldn't scratch in front of Derek. She kept moving. That was rung 1, though she'd have laughed if you'd told her. Peak confidence. Total control of a narrative that had already stopped being hers. "Conference is set for 10, she went on, brisk, reclaiming the room by scheduling it. "Numbers on the screen? Department leads up front. Somebody move that ridiculous balloon." Nobody moved the balloon. It was a small thing. But a floor that ignores a manager's easy order is a floor that has quietly stopped being sure who to obey. And the balloon just hung there, drooping, calling it out. Near the back of the group, the young analyst wasn't watching Victoria. He was watching the woman in the doorway, the way she stood, the way she hadn't offered her name, the way a legal executive from upstairs was standing very still and saying nothing while a stranger straightened his jacket. He was doing the math. He didn't have the answer, but he was the first person on that floor to understand there was a question. I watched him watch her, and I liked him for it. In every room, there's one person who notices the wrong thing has happened before the room admits it. Companies survive on those people. This one had buried this one at the back of a meeting he wasn't allowed to speak in. The woman by the printers had put her page down entirely now. She was looking at Rebecca too, then at me, then at the cloth folded on the armrest, assembling 3 facts into a shape she didn't like. She opened her mouth, thought better of it, and closed it. Not yet. Nobody had permission yet. That's the thing about a room like this. It waits for someone with rank to react first, and everyone with rank was busy being wrong. Derek clapped his hands once, a manager's reset, trying to sweep the strangeness off the floor by sheer volume. 10 o'clock, people, let's move. His voice was a half size too loud for the room. The way a voice gets when the speaker can feel the ground moving and is hoping noise will hold it still. His face was the last thing I noticed before the room settled back into its performance. A kid at the back of a meeting, realizing the meeting was not the meeting. Rebecca stayed in the doorway. Her face did not change. I still hadn't said a word. Part 2. Derek had made a small mistake, and small mistakes are the ones that finish you. The big ones you see coming. He'd handed a room full of witnesses a joke he could never take back. And now, he wanted to move on, like a man leaving a restaurant without checking the bill. I wasn't going to let him leave without checking the bill. The floor was still in that held moment. The after silence of the shoe scene. Victoria had herded everyone's eyes back to Derek, back to the schedule, back to the performance. 10 o'clock. Numbers on the screen. Normal, normal, normal. I looked at the new CEO of my subsidiary. 4 days into a job he'd gotten because I signed a letter. And I said the first word I'd spoken to anyone on that floor. Derek, one word, not loud, not a question. I said it the way you say a name you've read 100 times on a page and are finally attaching to a body. The ambient noise of the room dropped a register. Not silence. Offices are never fully silent. But the particular hush of 40 people pretending not to have heard something they all heard. Derek's body did a thing before his face caught up. A micro stutter. A half flinch. The flicker of a man whose brain has just been handed a fact it filed as impossible. A stranger. A servant. Using his first name. He almost asked how I knew. Almost. I watched the question form in his eyes. How does he know my name? And I watched him strangle it. Because a CEO asking a facilities man how he knows his name is a CEO admitting the floor is not his. So he swallowed it and reached for the social reflex instead. I'm sorry, he said, with a smile that had to be built from scratch. Have we met? There it was. A man does not ask a nobody whether they've met. You ask that of a peer whose face won't load. A name you should know and can't place. It is the single most revealing question a powerful man can accidentally ask, because it admits, in 5 words, that some part of him has already reclassified you upward and is scrambling to catch up. Derek had promoted me in his own head before he understood he was doing it, and the promotion frightened him more than the screen ever would. You ask that of a peer you've forgotten, an equal whose face won't load. The question itself was a promotion, and he'd handed it to me without noticing. I didn't answer. I let the question sit in the open where everyone could look at it. Victoria's professional smile was still bolted in place, but her eyes had changed. She'd expected this man to shrink after the shoes. He hadn't shrunk. He'd said the CEO's name like a landlord reading a lease, and now the CEO was asking if they'd met. None of it fit the picture she'd drawn, and I watched her try to redraw it in real time and fail. A woman 2 desks over leaned to her neighbor and breathed something behind her hand. I didn't need to hear it. The building had started talking to itself, one whisper at a time. The way a building does when the official story and the visible facts stop matching. Whispers are just a floor voting with the only ballot it has, and the tally was already lopsided. You learn to hear it if you have listened to enough rooms. The exact moment a floor changes its mind, not a sound so much as a shift in the air pressure. 100 small private recalculations happening at once behind 100 composed faces. None of them would say a word out loud for another 10 minutes. It did not matter. The vote was in. The counting was only a formality now, and Victoria was the last person in the room still out there campaigning for an office she had already lost. At the back of the group, the young analyst wasn't pretending anymore. He'd stopped even miming his screen. His eyes went from my wrist, to my mouth, to the woman in the doorway, and I could see him stacking the pieces into a shape that scared him a little. Here's what I knew that Derek didn't. His surname on this floor was Halloran. He'd introduced himself to them as Mr. Halloran, the new chief executive, a clean corporate handle with no first name attached. Nobody down here called him Derek. Nobody down here should have known to. So when a facilities man used it, flat, certain, first name, the only explanation was one Derek could not afford to reach for in public, and I watched him decline to reach for it. Rebecca did not move. 11 years, and she can hold a face like a photograph. She stood in the doorway with her folder and her phone and gave the room absolutely nothing, and the nothing was worth more than any speech. Derek's smile started to strain under its own weight. When a silence lasts 1 second too long, the person who caused it feels obligated to fill it, and he was that person now. He pivoted, hard, back to safe ground. Anyway, he clapped the word out like a door closing. Victoria, you were saying? She jumped on it. The third quarter rollout, she said, bright, fast, grateful for a script. Leads up front, numbers on the screen, we're ready when you are. They weren't going to move on, they just didn't know it yet. Because a room can be told to look forward, but a room decides for itself where to look. And this one had decided to look at me. Derek could hand out schedules all morning. The floor had quietly changed its center of gravity, and I was the center now, and I hadn't done anything but say a man's name. Derek felt it. That's the cruelty of a decent instinct in a shallow man. It tells him the truth just late enough to be useless. He'd dismissed me 2 minutes ago. Now he had to undismiss me without admitting he'd been wrong. And there's no clean way to do that in front of the people you were showing off for. So he did what men like him always do when the room slips. He tried to get it back with a joke. "Well," he said, turning it light, casual, tossing it to the crowd, "at least the service around here is prompt, right?" He waited for the laugh. He got two. Two thin laughs and a wall of silence so complete you could hear the birthday balloon shifting in the air current from the vents. One more, and he'd be performing for the potted plant. The first joke had gotten him 3, the second got him 2. At this rate of return, he had one more joke before he'd be telling them to the furniture, and some animal part of him knew it. Because his hands had started doing that spreading, settling gesture men make when they can feel authority draining out through their fingers. Victoria tried to save him. "Prompt service, that's the standard," she said, too quick, laughing a little to prime the room. Nobody joined her. Her laugh landed alone in the open and died there, and she heard it die. And I watched her file the sound away in whatever part of a person keeps the receipts they'll pay for later. That was the difference between them. Derek didn't know the room had turned. Victoria was starting to. She'd built her whole career on reading a room a half-second faster than her rivals. And that same instrument was now telling her something was wrong and refusing to tell her what. He stopped playing it light. He squared his shoulders, actually squared them, the way you were taught in some seminar to project command, and turned to face me directly. The first time he'd addressed me as a person instead of a punchline. "Can I help you with something?" he said. And there it was. He'd handed me the floor. He didn't mean to. He meant it as a challenge, a reassertion, get off my stage delivered in polite corporate. But strip the tone off and look at the words. The CEO, in front of his entire assembled staff, 4 minutes after co-signing my humiliation, had just formally invited me to speak. Whatever happened next, he had asked for it. In front of everyone. On the record. Again. I didn't take it right away. Instead, I glanced at my watch. Not a nervous check, a scheduling one. The small, automatic look of a man who has somewhere to be and is confirming he's still on time for it. To Derek, it read as hesitation. To the room, it read as hesitation. It was neither. It was a man confirming a clock nobody else could see. Across the floor, Victoria had stopped watching me. She'd turned toward the doorway, toward Rebecca. She was trying to read the still woman in the gray suit. Who is she? Why is legal down here? Why won't she introduce herself? And Rebecca gave her the same nothing she'd given everyone. Then Rebecca did the smallest possible thing. She looked at me, and she nodded. Once. A nod so slight most of the room missed it entirely. The tilt of a chin, gone before it fully arrived. It wasn't for Victoria. It wasn't for the room. It was for me. And it meant, ready when you are. And it was the most familiar gesture 2 strangers could possibly exchange in front of 40 people. Except we weren't strangers, and one person on that floor was close enough to see that. Victoria caught the nod. She just couldn't read it. She saw a legal executive she didn't know silently acknowledge a servant she'd just humiliated. And her face did the thing a face does when the ground reports itself unstable. A flicker. Quickly buried, the professional smile snapping back over it a half-second late. That half-second was rung 3. Doubt, the first time she stopped being certain and started being afraid, though she'd have called it neither. The junior employee saw all of it. I want to be fair to him, because he was the only honest instrument in that room. He'd watched the watch in the corridor. He'd heard me use Derek's name without an introduction. He'd just seen a head of legal nod to me like we'd worked 11 years together. 3 facts, and unlike everyone else on that floor, he'd stopped trying to make them fit the comfortable story and started letting them build the uncomfortable one. His expression didn't change. That's how I knew he'd gotten it. The people who are wrong get loud. The people who understand go quiet, and he had gone very, very quiet. Standing at the back of a meeting he wasn't senior enough to speak in, holding the answer everyone above him had missed. I clocked his badge from across the floor, junior title, low pay grade, the kind of role a company like this one grinds through and forgets. He'd probably been told a dozen times to keep his head down and his opinions smaller. And here he was, the only person on the floor who'd read the situation correctly, precisely because nobody had ever bothered to teach him whose face he was supposed to flatter. I made a note. I make a lot of notes. Some of them turn into offers. The room is doing its own math now, I thought. I'll give it a few seconds. Derek was still waiting. Can I help you with something? Hung there, unanswered, curdling. He'd asked a question expecting a small answer. No, sir. Sorry, sir. Just fixing the printer, sir. and instead he'd gotten a man checking his watch and a legal executive nodding from the doorway. And none of the reactions he'd budgeted for were arriving. I let the pause run one beat longer than was comfortable, because comfort was his to lose, not mine. Then I spoke my second sentence of the morning. 2 words, quiet, to no one in particular, and to the whole room at once. One moment. I didn't look at Derek when I said it. I didn't look at Victoria. I looked at Rebecca, across the floor, in the doorway, and I held the look 1 second longer than a man looks at someone he's never met. Her expression didn't change, but there was no surprise in it either, and the absence of surprise is its own confession. You do not fail to be surprised when a stranger singles you out of a crowd. She'd been waiting for exactly this. Her thumb moved on the edge of her phone, a small adjustment of grip, the readiness of a hand that already had something cued and was only waiting for the word. The junior employee clocked the phone too. Of course he did. He looked at Rebecca's thumb, then at the big lobby display visible through the glass past the doorway, then back at me. And something in his shoulders dropped an inch, the small collapse of a person who has just guessed the ending and can't say it out loud. The room was assembled. Derek had given me the floor. The clock in my head said the time was right. I let my eyes come back off Rebecca and settle, at last, on the new CEO of my company. Who was standing in front of his staff with his shoulders squared and his question hanging and absolutely no idea that he'd spent the last 4 minutes building the case against himself. Sentence by sentence, laugh by laugh, all on his own. I hadn't pushed him once. Part 3. Here's a thing most people never learn about power. The person who can afford to wait is the person who already won. Everyone else is filling silence. I was letting it fill them. I'd said, 1 moment, and now I was spending that moment. Not performing patience, just holding still while a room full of people did work I didn't have to do myself. Victoria had stopped watching me. She was watching Rebecca. I could see the effort in it. Victoria reads people for a living. It's the actual skill under the title, the thing that got her the awards angled at the aisle. She was running that instrument on Rebecca now, full power, and getting nothing back. No rank signal she could place. No reason a head of legal would stand silent in a doorway watching a servant get insulted. No category to file her in. She's been running her usual read on Rebecca for 45 seconds. It's the same expression the network printer makes when it hits a file it can't open. All the lights are on. Nothing is printing. You could see her cycle through the options. Auditor? No. Auditors bring teams and lanyards and a lot of throat clearing. HR? No. HR sits down. HR schedules. Some executive assistant sent to observe, but assistants fidget. And this woman had the stillness of someone who outranked half the building and felt no need to prove it. Each guess got raised, examined, discarded. None of them explained the folder. None of them explained the phone. None of them explained why a woman like that would stand and watch and say nothing. Do we have a legal thing today? Victoria murmured to Derek sideways, barely moving her lips. A manager's deflection. Turn the unknown into a scheduling question. Make it small. Make it someone else's calendar problem. Not that I was told, Derek murmured back, and the not that I was told was doing a lot of work. A new CEO does not enjoy admitting there are things happening in his building that he wasn't told about. He filed it as an oversight. It was the opposite of an oversight. It was the most carefully scheduled thing in the room. People Victoria can't read make Victoria nervous, because being unreadable is a privilege. And privilege is exactly the thing she thought she'd cornered this morning. Rebecca had it. Rebecca hadn't earned it in front of her. That was intolerable, and there was nothing she could do about it except keep glancing at the doorway, like the answer might load on a delay. Derek, meanwhile, had decided the pause was administrative. Some visitor thing, not his problem. He turned back toward Victoria to resume being the CEO. So, he started, the rollout. A third staff member glanced at my wrist. The watch again. This time Victoria caught the glance, saw the direction of it, followed it to my arm, landed on the watch for the first time. I watched the detail enter her records. A plain man in a plain jacket, wearing a piece that cost more than the car she parked downstairs. It didn't fit the man she'd drawn. Her expression didn't change, but her rationalization did. I could see her decide it was a knockoff, a gift, a mistake, anything but the thing it was. People will invent 6 wrong explanations before accepting one uncomfortable right one. It's the most reliable behavior in the world, because the right explanation was expensive. The right explanation meant she'd put her foot on an armrest and ordered a man to polish her shoe. And the man had a reason to be wearing that watch. And the reasons a man like that wears a watch like that do not end well for the person who handed him a rag. Her mind swerved around it the way a car swerves around a hole it saw too late. Knockoff. It's a knockoff. Keep driving. I have watched a great many people take that same mental off-ramp, and it has never once led anywhere but off a cliff at speed. The comfortable lie buys you 30 seconds of feeling fine and charges you the next 30 years in interest. The people who survive rooms like this one are the ones who let the uncomfortable truth in while it is still small, while it is still a question and not yet a verdict. Victoria let hers in far too late. By the time she stopped calling the watch a knockoff, it had stopped being a watch at all and become the first line of her obituary at this company. 2 desks back, a woman leaned to the man beside her and said something with her hand over her mouth. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, then at the dark screen on the wall, then back at his keyboard, and typed nothing. The floor had split into 2 rooms now, the people still performing the meeting, and the people who had quietly stopped and were waiting to find out what they were actually watching. Rebecca's phone was in her hand now. Not raised, just held, at her side, the way you hold something you're about to use. She'd had it out since she walked in. Nobody had asked why Legal was filming a Tuesday stand-up. With her thumb resting on the screen, I turned back to face the room. Derek took my attention, returning as an opening. He'd been performing normalcy for 90 seconds, and it had bought him nothing. So he did the thing rattled men do. He reached for directness, thinking volume of words would pass for control. "Look," he said, and the word was already too big. "I'm not sure who invited you here, but if there's something you actually need, Victoria can help you find your way out." 3 sentences. He knew it was too many while he was still saying them. You could watch the knowledge arrive on his face on sentence 3. The small internal wince of a man who hears himself over-explaining and can't stop the train. I didn't rush to answer. I gave the 3 sentences room to hang there and be counted. Then I glanced, once, at the dark screen mounted on the lobby wall behind him. The briefest possible look, a quarter second, off and back. Nobody caught it. 1 person caught it. The junior employee at the back followed my eyes to the screen and then back to me, and I watched him understand that the screen mattered without knowing how. He was doing my job better than anyone I'd hired to do it. Derek felt the floor still refusing to return to him, so he squared his shoulders again, the seminar posture, chest out, chin level, and delivered the same line he delivered a minute ago. The only tool he had left, this time with an edge sanded onto it. "Can I help you with something?" The first time he'd said it, it was a power move, "Get off my stage," delivered to remind the room who owned the stage. This second time, same words, entirely different animal. The first one was a power move. The second one is a prayer. That's the tell with men like Derek. When the first swing misses, they don't change the swing. They swing harder with the same arm. He'd found a sentence that felt like authority in his mouth, and he was going to keep saying it until it worked. And it was never going to work. And some part of him, past the seminar training, had started to suspect that. He tried to fill the gap with more of himself. "Because we're actually in the middle of something here," he added, gesturing at the assembled floor, at Victoria, at the whole apparatus of his big morning. "This is a working team. I don't know what you were told about access, but this isn't a walk-in situation." Every sentence was a shovel. He kept describing his authority, and the more he described it, the more the room heard a man who had to describe it. Real authority never explains its own access. It does not need to. It simply occupies the space and lets the space agree. The moment a man begins building a case for why he belongs in a room, he has already conceded that the room is deciding, and a room that is deciding has stopped being his. Derek was making an argument. You only ever make an argument when you are afraid of the verdict, and everyone on that floor could smell the fear coming off it like heat off a road. It doesn't need to. The CEO of a company does not stand in the middle of his own floor arguing that he belongs there. He just belongs there. Derek was making a case, and you only make a case when you're afraid of the verdict. I said nothing. My silence was doing more talking than his 3 paragraphs, and he could hear it. And hearing it made him talk more, which is the loop that eats men like him alive. The junior employee had stepped a half pace to the side, a small thing, but it gave him a clean line to both me and the doorway. The instinct of a person who has realized he's watching something and doesn't want to miss the frame. He'd figured out where the camera should point before the scene even started. Wrong pay grade, right eyes. Victoria's smile had finally slipped. Not dramatically, just a fraction, the corners losing their conviction, the muscles tiring of holding a shape that no longer matched anything real in the room. She was still aimed at Derek, still reading her boss lose altitude, and the reading was making her sick in a way she couldn't show. Everything she'd performed this morning had been an investment in his authority. She was watching the stock drop, and she couldn't sell. Victoria heard the edge too, and for the first time all morning, she looked at Derek instead of me. It was a small movement of the eyes, but it was the whole game changing hands. Up to this second, she'd been managing me, the servant, the problem, the things she'd staged. Now she was studying her boss, the man she'd built this entire performance to impress. And what she saw was a CEO saying the same 4 words twice because he had no 5th word. She'd bet her morning on his authority. She was watching it develop a crack, live, and she had no idea yet that she was standing on the other side of it. Through all of it, Rebecca had not moved. Not a shift of weight, not a glance at her watch, not the small social flinching a person does when a room gets tense around them. 11 years, and I still find it remarkable. The discipline of standing perfectly still while a man you respect gets called trash to his face. Because moving one muscle would give the game away a minute early. Her stillness wasn't passivity. It was the hardest thing anyone in that room was doing. Everyone else was performing. She was the only one holding. The room had gone fully quiet now, that dense, waiting quiet. Everyone could feel that we'd arrived somewhere. Nobody could have told you where. I let one more beat pass, the last one. Then I spoke, and I didn't speak to Derek, and I didn't speak to the room, and I didn't speak to Victoria. I turned my head slightly toward the doorway and said one word. Rebecca. I said it the way you say the name of someone you've worked beside for 11 years. Flat. Certain. No introduction, because none was needed. Because everyone was about to understand that the woman in the doorway was not a stranger to me, and never had been. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just met my eyes, and there was no surprise in her. None. The calm of a person who has been standing in a doorway for 20 minutes, waiting for exactly this. 2 more words. Quiet. Not a request. The display. Derek's mouth opened. What? Rebecca lifted her phone. 4 taps. I didn't watch her do it. I watched Derek, because Derek's face was where the story was about to happen. Behind him, the big lobby screen woke up. It flickered once, the way screens do, a wash of blue, and then content resolving out of it. Light spilled across the back of the room. Heads turned toward it, the automatic pull of a bright screen in a quiet room, 40 faces rotating toward the wall at once. I didn't turn. I already knew what was on it. Victoria's hand went to her lanyard. She didn't decide to do it. It just happened, her fingers finding the badge at her chest, closing around it. The unconscious reach of a body that has understood something a half-second before the mind will allow it. She wasn't reading the screen yet. She was bracing for it. That was rung 4. The moment doubt became fear, before she had a single fact to justify it. The animal knew. The manager hadn't caught up. Derek turned to look at the screen. The room began to read. And part of me, the small, tired, human part I don't let drive, enjoyed the quarter-second of quiet right before a room full of people learns it has spent the whole morning laughing at the wrong man. It's not pride. Pride would have spoken sooner. It's closer to the feeling of watching a long equation finally resolve. Every term you planted canceling out exactly where it should. Victoria's grip tightened on the lanyard. Derek leaned toward the wall, reading. Somewhere behind me a chair rolled back an inch, as someone stood without meaning to. Then the screen finished loading, and the morning stopped being theirs. Part 4. The screen resolved, and the room stopped being a room and became an audience. It was the company org chart, clean, corporate. The kind of slide legal keeps current for board packets and never expects to see thrown on a lobby wall at 9:51 on a Tuesday. A tree of names and titles and small round photos, branching downward from a single box at the top. The box at the top said, Julian Albright, Chairman, Albright Group. Beside the name, a photo. My photo. The plain jacket, the flat expression, the man who had been kneeling with a rag 90 seconds ago. 4 tiers down, in the smaller boxes where the operating companies branch out, 2 more names sat side by side under the Meridian heading. Owen Gallagher, Chief Executive, Meridian. Eleanor Vance, Department Manager, Meridian. Aldridge Group owned Meridian. My name owned the building. It had owned the building the whole time. The carpet, the coffee, the motivational poster, the birthday balloon, the chair Victoria propped her foot on. All of it, mine, while I knelt on it. The room read the chart the way you read a sentence that ends differently than it started. Then came the silence. 7 seconds. That's how long it takes a room to recalibrate who it is afraid of. I counted them. I always count them. Second one, they read the top box. Second two, they read my photo and doubt their own eyes. Second three, their eyes drop 4 tears and find the 2 names that had been running their morning. Second 4, the math completes. Seconds 5, 6, and 7 are the sound a floor makes when 40 people simultaneously replay the last 10 minutes and realize what they were part of. Nobody moved. A phone would have been deafening. The vents hummed. The birthday balloon turned slowly on its string, oblivious. The only thing in the room still doing what it had done a minute ago. I found the 3, one at a time. The 3 who'd laughed at Derek's joke. I'd filed their faces without meaning to, the way you file the number 3, and now I watched each of them arrive at the same place a beat apart. The first one, a man near the printers, went pale in a slow wave, the specific color a person turns when they remember they laughed. The second put a hand over their mouth, not in shock, in something closer to prayer. The third just closed their eyes for a second. The private wince of a person editing their own morning in real time and finding no version they can live with. That's the cost of an easy laugh. It's a loan. You take it out in a second, and the interest comes due whenever the room turns. And the room always turns eventually. I hadn't made them laugh. I'd only counted. But counting is a kind of memory, and memory is a kind of gravity, and the 3 of them could feel it pulling now. A woman by the printers, the one who'd frozen with a page half out of the tray an hour ago, set the page down at last. Very gently, as though a loud noise might make the screen say it again. Victoria's hand found her lanyard. She didn't look down at it. Her fingers just closed around the badge at her chest, the small credential that said she belonged here. That gave her a floor to run and a foot to raise, and she held it the way you hold a railing on a stair that has just moved under you. Then her eyes went to the floor, to the shoes. The polished shoes, sitting where she'd presented them, the leather still catching the light because I'd done the job properly. They sat on the carpet between her and me like an exhibit that had been entered into evidence, and she could not stop looking at them, and she could not look at them, and her face tried to do both at once. Derek was slower. Status made him slower. He looked at the screen, he looked at me. He looked back at the screen because the first read hadn't been survivable, so he was hoping the second one would say something different. It said the same thing. I watched a specific sequence cross his face, and it's a sequence I've seen before, but never quite this clean. Certainty, then doubt, then the total evacuation of certainty, then nothing. Just a man's face with the power switched off, still warm, not yet dark. Behind me, the junior employee had gone completely still. I didn't need to turn to know his expression. It was the expression of the only person who'd read the ending 3 chapters early and had to sit there while everyone else caught up. Not triumph. Just the quiet vertigo of being right about something you'd hoped you were wrong about. Rebecca slid her phone into her jacket pocket. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Derek or Victoria. Her 4 taps were done. Her display was up. And a head of legal standing witness in a doorway had just made the whole thing official instead of personal. That's what she was there for. Not support. Standing. Legal doesn't clap. Legal notarizes. Status blindness is a specific disease. It's the condition of only being able to see power in people who perform it. Derek had it in the terminal stage. In his world, real authority walked in loud, announced itself, wore the suit, and took the head of the table. He had never once considered that the quiet man at the edge of the room might be the table. He'd built an entire career on the assumption that power looks like power. The screen had just handed him the bill for it. That is the whole disease in a sentence. Status blindness is not stupidity. Derek was not a stupid man. It is a specific and expensive kind of certainty. The belief that power arrives loud, wears the suit, and announces itself at the door. A man who believes that will look straight at the quiet person who owns everything and see furniture. He will do it every single time. And every so often, the furniture stands up. Derek opened his mouth. I was already looking at my phone. There was a message from the board secretary about the 11 o'clock, and a second one confirming a car. I read them both. They were more interesting than anything Derek was about to say, and I wanted him to see that they were. Attention is the only currency that matters in a room like this, and I was spending mine somewhere else, in full view, on purpose. Marcus, he started. My first name now. No, Mr. Aldridge. The informality of a drowning man reaching for the nearest wrist. I think there may have been some kind of a misunderstanding here, clearly. And I want to... The sentence didn't have an end, and he didn't have one to give it. He was assembling words in the order that panic hands them over, which is never the right order. I didn't look up. That's the thing men like Derek can't survive. Not the reveal, the indifference after it. He had prepared, somewhere in the 2 seconds available to him, a negotiation, a misunderstanding, a reset. He needed me to look up so the negotiation could begin. A negotiation requires 2 people looking at each other. I gave him the top of my head and my full attention on a text message about catering logistics, and his whole recovery had nowhere to land. He kept going anyway. More words. Something about context, about how these things can look, about how he'd only been supporting a manager's call. Each sentence dug the last one deeper. Every person on that floor was now hearing their CEO explain, in real time, that he'd known exactly what he was co-signing and had done it because it looked good in the moment. You have to understand the situation I walked into, he said, spreading his hands, appealing now not to me, but to the room, which was worse. I'm 4 days in. I was trusting my managers. If Victoria told me, and there it was, the first pivot, 4 days in and already reaching for the name beside his on the chart, already sliding the weight toward her. He hadn't decided to do it. Panic decides for men like Derek, and panic's first instinct is always to find the nearest person and stand behind them. Victoria heard her name come out of his mouth in that sentence, heard the shape of it, if Victoria told me, heard him begin, 4 days in, to build the story where this was hers, and he was the man who trusted the wrong manager. Her face didn't crumble. It did something quieter and more permanent. It closed. I typed a short reply to the board secretary. Then I said the only thing I said to Derek all morning, and I said it without looking up. I signed your letter, Derek. 4 words. His appointment, the thing that made him CEO. The letter that put his name in that box 4 tiers down. I'd signed it 2 months ago at a desk he'd never seen. And I'd just told the entire floor that the same hand that made him could unmake him, and had. Derek opened his mouth again. Nothing came out. 2 full seconds. His jaw worked, his throat moved, and no sound arrived. A man buffering in front of 40 people. In 11 years, I have never seen a man forget how sentences work in real time. It's a genuine phenomenon, up close. The verbal apparatus just quits. He had spent the morning as a man who talked his way through everything, whose entire toolkit was words and a confident voice. And I watched the toolkit empty out onto the floor between us, right next to the shoes. Victoria looked at Derek. I saw it happen in the corner of my vision, her head turning to him, the reflex of a person reaching for the one ally the plan depended on. Derek. The man she'd staged the whole morning to impress. The man who was supposed to be worth it. He wasn't looking back at her. His eyes were pointed inward, running the only calculation that mattered to him now, which was how to get away from her. Not how to help her, how to be somewhere she wasn't. And she saw the direction of his eyes, and she understood the direction of his eyes, and something in her went very quiet. She looked back down at the shoes on the floor. She couldn't seem to stop returning to them. They were the most honest object in the room, proof of exactly what she'd done, buffed to a shine. Sitting in the open where everyone could see it and connect it to the name in the top box. I still hadn't looked up from my phone. The room hadn't been told to do anything, so it did nothing, which is its own kind of verdict. Nobody returned to their desk. Nobody was dismissed. 40 people stood in a loose, broken circle around a screen, a CEO who'd stopped forming words, a manager staring at a pair of shoes, and a chairman answering email, and the not moving was the loudest thing in the building. I have watched a lot of rooms decide what they think of a person. It usually takes weeks. Reputations are built in slow deposits, a favor here, a missed deadline there, until the balance is what it is. This room had rebuilt its entire opinion of 3 people in under a minute, and the terrible efficiency of it was written on every face, because a reputation that can collapse in a minute was never as solid as the person standing on it believed. Rebecca had drifted 1 step deeper into the room, not toward us, toward the HR corridor. The small repositioning of a person who knows the next thing that happens is procedural and wants a clean line to the door it happens behind. She still hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. Everyone had stopped wondering who she was. The screen had answered that too. Legal, standing beside the chairman's reveal. Which is the corporate equivalent of the sky going dark before the part where it rains. Victoria looked at Derek one more time. He owes me this, the look said. He hired me. He endorsed me. He made the joke first. Derek's eyes were nowhere near her. I typed one more note, a line to Rebecca's team. 3 words, the administrative machinery starting to turn. The consequence was already running now, and it didn't need me to steer it. That's the whole point of doing the work before you walk into the room. By the time anyone understands what's happening, you're not driving anymore. You're just present while it happens. Then I put my phone away. I looked up. Not at Derek. Derek was finished, and finished men aren't worth the turn of a head. I looked past him, across the polished shoes and the broken circle and the 7 kinds of silence, and I settled my eyes on Victoria Shaw. Who had put her foot on an armrest an hour ago and called me trash in front of the man she thought would save her? For a second, she almost said something. I watched the words gather at the edge of her mouth. An explanation, a defense, the manager's reflex to reframe any room she's losing. Then she looked at the shoes again, and looked at the top box on the screen, and the words went back down her throat unspoken. There was no version. She was good enough at reading rooms to know when there was no version, and this was the first honest thing she'd done all morning. She felt the look land. She met it. And I let her see that I knew exactly who she was, not just from a badge in a hallway, but from a file with her name on it that I'd read long before I ever walked into this building. Part 5. Derek was still talking. That was the remarkable thing. The screen had answered every question a person could have about the room, and Derek was still producing words into it, the way a machine keeps running for a second after you cut the power. I'd already stopped looking at him. My eyes were on Victoria now. But Derek didn't need eye contact to keep going. He needed it to stop, and no one was giving him that, so he kept reaching for a sentence that would put the morning back the way it was. Because what happened here, what this is, really, is there's a version of this where everyone just... He stopped. Started again from a different corner. The optics, obviously the optics aren't, but if we step back, the actual situation is... He never finished any of them. He'd start a sentence with confidence and get halfway across before the floor gave out. And then he'd back up and try a different sentence over the same hole. A man doesn't run out of words because he has too few. He runs out because every word he owns leads to the same place he can't afford to arrive. I typed a note to Rebecca's team and let him talk. There's nothing you can say to a man in that state that lands harder than declining to say anything. Silence isn't the absence of a response. When you've earned it, silence is the response. Most people never learn this because most people are frightened of a pause. They rush to fill it, to soften it, to prove they are still liked. The powerful thing is to let it stand, to let the other person hear their own last sentence echo in a room that has declined to answer. I have ended negotiations with a silence that cost me nothing, and the other side, everything. Derek was learning it now, in public, at the worst tuition rate a lesson has ever charged. He was doing all my work for me, and that's the part the story never quite captures when people tell it later. They imagine I dismantled him, some cold speech, a list of his failures read aloud. I never said a word about his failures. I didn't need to. I'd handed him a room and a silence, and he was filling both with the truth about himself. Sentence by unfinished sentence, and every person present was taking notes I'd never have to write. The most efficient interrogation in the world is a quiet room and a guilty man who can't stand the quiet. I did not invent that. I only learned, a long time ago, to stop rescuing people from their own silence. It is the hardest discipline there is, because every instinct in a decent person rushes to fill a painful pause, to smooth it, to offer the drowning man a hand. I keep my hands in my pockets, not out of cruelty, out of respect for the truth, which only ever arrives when nobody is helping it along. Derek filled that quiet with everything I would otherwise have needed a week of depositions to pull out of him. And he did it for free, because he could not bear to let it sit. There are things about running a company that people at your level don't have to see the day-to-day of. He was explaining executive leadership, to me, on my floor, beneath my name on a 50-inch screen. Somewhere past exhaustion, I found the whole thing almost educational. This is what a man sounds like when his self-image and the visible facts are trying to occupy the same square foot of air, and neither will yield. Marcus, Chairman, Sir. He tried titles now, cycling through them like keys on a ring, hoping one would open something. I would never have, if I had known who you, obviously I would have. Obviously he'd have behaved differently if he'd known there was a camera. That's not a defense. That's a confession with better lighting. I have sat across a table from every grade of guilty man, and sooner or later, they all reach for the same sentence, polished to the same shine. If I had known. As though knowledge were the thing that made the cruelty wrong. As though the only real sin was being seen doing it. It is not. The camera does not create the crime. It only removes the excuse. And in one clumsy, panicked sentence, in front of his entire floor, Derek had just testified that his decency had always been a performance. Switched on for an audience that mattered, and switched off for a man he had decided did not. Every man who says, "I would never have if I'd known," is telling you precisely what he does when he thinks no one who matters is watching. 4 titles in one breath. Chairman, Sir, and my first name twice, and he still hadn't landed on the one that would make me look up. I've been negotiated with by professionals, men who could talk a bank out of its own vault, and watching Derek was like watching one of them with the language center removed. All the instinct, none of the equipment. I built this floor's whole morning around showing you a functioning, a high-performing. He gestured at the staff, at the desks, at the drooping birthday balloon, offering the whole room as evidence of his competence at the exact moment the room was evidence of the opposite. This is a good team. This is a good team, and the good team said nothing. 40 people declined, in unison, to be his character witnesses. A team defends a leader it believes in. It goes quiet for one it's just finished re-evaluating. He'd told them on day 1 that standards get set in week 1. They'd absorbed the lesson. They were setting one now, by standing there and letting him hang. Near the back, the junior employee had his arms folded, watching the man who signed off on his pay grade forget how to speak. His face still hadn't changed. He'd known where this was going since the corridor. The only new information for him was watching everyone else arrive. Victoria's hand went to her lanyard again. Second time. She wasn't performing anymore. The professional smile was gone, packed away, no audience left worth the effort. She just held the badge at her chest the way you hold a thing you've been told to return, but haven't been asked for yet. The manager tag. An hour ago it was armor. Now it was a receipt. The staff watched Derek implode, with that specific quality of attention people give a public collapse, half horror, half the helpless pull of not being able to look away. These were the people he'd assembled to establish his culture. He'd wanted them to see how a leader runs a floor. They were seeing exactly that, just not the lesson he'd planned. Then I looked up from my phone. Not at Derek. Derek was a closed file. You don't keep reading a file after you've stamped it. I looked at Victoria Shaw, and I let the look sit on her until the last of Derek's fragments died in the air. And the room understood that the next thing that happened was going to be quiet and aimed and hers. This isn't the first time, is it, Victoria? I said it flat, no lift at the end, not a question. I don't ask questions I already have the answer to. A question offers a person an exit. This was a statement, and statements close doors. Her body froze, just for a half second. Every performed motion, the small adjustments a person makes to look composed, stopped at once. The way a video stops when the signal drops, one frame held a beat too long. In that half second, the whole room read the truth off her, because a body that freezes at "this isn't the first time" is a body that knows exactly which times you mean. Then she recovered, because recovering is what she does. I was simply managing a situation, she said, the professional voice climbing back into her throat. There are always going to be difficult... She didn't finish either. She heard how it sounded, managing a situation. With the situation standing in front of her wearing the name at the top of the screen, and the sentence folded on its own. I didn't answer her. I didn't have to. Her freeze had already told the floor there was a file, and I've learned that the freeze does more damage than the file ever could. If I'd listed the prior complaints, the room would have weighed each one, argued the details, found a version where each was unfair. But her own body had just confirmed the whole record in half a second, and there is no arguing with that. She testified against herself before I said a word. I checked my watch. 2 personnel slots to fill. Board call in 38 minutes. She is still holding her lanyard. It's a strange thing about a morning like this. The same 60 seconds that end a person's entire career are. From the other chair, a staffing problem and a calendar. I wasn't being cruel. Cruelty would require me to care about her collapse as an event. It was simply an item now, a box that would need a new name in it by end of quarter, and my mind had already moved to who. Across from me, Derek made his last real choice of the morning. He looked at Victoria, not with anger, not even with fear, with blame. His eyes found her and stayed there for a full second, and the message in them was as clear as anything said aloud all day. This was you. You did this. I only stood here. He'd spent the morning endorsing her, naming her to the staff as the standard, laughing first, and now. With the room watching, he pointed the whole thing at her with nothing but the direction of his gaze. The room saw the look. That was the part he didn't survive. Not the screen. The screen was mine. The look was his own, freely chosen. A man abandoning the person he'd publicly backed the instant the backing came due. And 40 people watched him do it and filed it exactly where it belonged. I want to be precise about what that look cost him. Because it's the kind of thing people underestimate. The screen made him unemployed. The look made him unhireable. Somewhere in that room were people who would tell this story for years, at other companies, over other drinks, and in every version the ending would be the same. And then, when it all came apart, he tried to pin it on the woman he'd been praising 30 seconds earlier. You can rebuild a career after a bad day. You cannot rebuild it after everyone learns exactly who you are when the day goes bad. A woman 2 desks over, one of the 3 who'd laughed, actually flinched at the blame look. A small recoil, as if the pettiness of it had a temperature. She'd laughed at his joke an hour ago. She was getting a full, unobstructed view now of the man she'd laughed along with. And I watched her decide something permanent about him without a word. Victoria saw it too. Something went out of her when she did. Up to that second, some part of her had still been running the old math. He hired me, he endorsed me, he made the joke first, he owes me cover. The blame look erased the equation. There was no cover coming. There had never been any cover coming. She'd performed the entire morning for a man who would drop her at the first sign of weather. And she'd found it out in front of everyone she'd performed it for. Rebecca spoke for the first time since the doorway. "Done," she said. One word, one syllable. She wasn't talking to the room. She was talking to me, confirming something already in motion. And the flatness of it, the sheer administrative calm of one word from legal, landed on Victoria and Derek harder than any speech. Because it meant the thing they were still emotionally inside had already been processed, filed, and closed somewhere they couldn't see. HR was in Conference B. It had been booked before any of them walked onto this floor. I checked the time again, and then I said the last thing I had to say in that lobby. "Your access cards will stop working in," I looked at the watch, 4 minutes. I let the pause be what it was. Not hesitation, a reading. The precision was the point, and I watched the precision land, because 4 minutes is not a number you reach for in the heat of a decision. 4 minutes is a number that was already running before you arrived. Anyone in that room quick enough to hear it understood, in that half second, that none of this had been decided just now. It had been decided somewhere else, earlier, by someone who then walked in and knelt down to confirm one last data point before closing the file. "HR is in Conference B," I said. "Rebecca will oversee transition." 3 sentences. That was the whole administrative close. Derek tried one more time. "Marcus, if we could just... there has to be a..." And it went nowhere, same as all the others. A sentence walking off the same cliff its brothers had. Victoria's hand closed around her lanyard and then dropped to her side, where her access card sat in her jacket pocket. She didn't take it out. She just became aware of it, the small rectangle of plastic that opened every door in a building that was never hers. Suddenly heavy, suddenly borrowed, suddenly on a 4-minute clock. You never feel a thing you own. You only feel it when someone asks for it back. 4 minutes is enough time to understand a great deal, enough to realize the meeting she'd staged this morning had never been a meeting. It had been a test, and she'd walked into it and volunteered for the failing grade in the first 60 seconds. Enough to replay the foot on the armrest and hear, this time, how it must have sounded to the quiet man holding the rag. Enough to know that the shoes still sitting on the floor between us would be. For a long time, the first thing anyone thought of when they heard her name. She didn't cry, I'll give her that. Some people fall apart loudly. It's a way of asking the room for something. Victoria had read the room well enough to know it had nothing left to give her. So she stood very straight and very still and let the 4 minutes run. Which was, I think, the most dignified thing available to her, and possibly the first genuinely strategic decision she'd made all day. Derek had started drifting, not toward the elevator, away from Victoria. A half step, then another. The small survival choreography of a man trying to be standing somewhere that isn't next to the person the room is looking at. He didn't seem to know he was doing it. The body negotiates its own escape, while the mouth is still forming apologies. And everyone could see the negotiation except him. And I began to move. Not fast, not with any flourish. I turned toward the elevator bank the way you turn toward the next thing on a list, because that's what it was. The screen was still on behind me, my name still at the top of it, throwing its light across a floor that had gone completely still. Nobody had told the staff to return to their desks, so they stood. Nobody had told Victoria or Derek to leave, so they stayed. Rooted in the middle of the lobby, with 4 minutes on the clock, and nowhere left to stand that wasn't mine, I didn't look back at them. There was nothing behind me I needed to see. Everything back there was already running on its own now, exactly as designed, and I was already thinking about the elevator. And the call in 38 minutes, and the 2 empty boxes on an org chart that would need new names by Friday. Behind me, I heard the small sound of a room that has not been dismissed and does not know what it is allowed to do next. I let it keep not knowing. That too was part of the answer. Part 6. The best measure of control is how little of it you have to keep holding. I was walking toward the elevator now, and behind me the whole thing kept running without my hand on it, which is the only kind of outcome worth engineering, the kind that finishes itself while you check the time. Derek was still talking, to my back now. That was new. A man will address the back of your head if it's the last surface in the room that hasn't refused him yet. Marcus, and I think, going forward, whatever because Victoria, and I want to be clear about Victoria, because Victoria was the one who she set the tone here, and Victoria? He overnames people when he's nervous. First week tell. 3 Victorias in one sentence. I clocked it from 12 feet away without turning around, the way you notice a coin drop in a quiet room. It's a real thing, that tick. A certain kind of man, under pressure, keeps saying the name of the person he's trying to bury. As if repetition will make the room agree the body belongs to her and not to him. Every Victoria was a little shovel. He was digging a grave and standing in it, and he'd have been genuinely surprised to be told which one he was doing. I didn't slow down. The fragments kept coming, and they kept getting smaller. First the sentences lost their endings, then they lost their middles. By the time I reached the edge of the lobby, he wasn't producing thoughts anymore, just the front halves of thoughts. Because the thing is that, what nobody's words shed off a man the way heat comes off a stone after the sun's gone down. No purpose to it, just the last of something leaving, and the room gave him nothing back. That was the engine of it. In a normal collapse, there's a mercy somewhere, someone who looks away to spare you, someone who fills your silence so it isn't so total. This room had decided, all 40 of them at once and without a word of coordination, to withhold exactly that. They let every fragment land and die in the open air. They made him hear himself. You can't organize that. It isn't a decision anyone announces. A room simply reaches a shared verdict at the same instant, some silent tally crossing a line. And after that, the withholding runs itself. These were people who had spent 4 days learning to laugh at Derek's jokes on cue, to look diligent when he passed, to point their whole bodies at his glass office. The training was still fresh. And they were using every bit of it in reverse now. The same attentiveness that had flattered him turned into the same attentiveness that let him drown. A man near the front actually took a small step back, not away from danger, just out of the splash radius. The instinct of someone who doesn't want a single drop of this landing on him. Derek saw the step. I watched him see it. It's one thing to lose a room. It's another to watch the room physically decide not to be near you. And he got to have both, one after the other, in the same 30 seconds. Because if anyone would just, he wasn't even aiming the fragments anymore. They were coming out on their own, the reflex of a mouth that has always had somewhere to go and can't accept that the road is gone. His last attempt wasn't even a sentence. It was one word. Look! Aimed at no one. And it hit the quiet and sank without a ripple. And then there was nothing. He'd run out. A man who'd talked his way through his entire life. Standing in the middle of a floor he'd been running for 4 days. Finally and completely out of words. The silence after it was the loudest thing that had happened all morning. I stopped near the elevator bank and for the first time, let myself simply watch the room finish the job I'd started, because it was doing it better than I could have. Here is what struck me, and I've thought about it since. Nobody was enjoying it. I've been in rooms where the powerful fall and the crowd feasts, the gasps, the raised phones, the barely hidden delight of people who get to watch someone above them come down. This wasn't that. The staff stood in the lobby and watched Victoria Shaw's morning end, and not one face on that floor was gloating. Not the 3 who'd laughed, not the ones she'd managed hardest. Nobody. And that absence was worse for her than any jeer could have been. A jeer is a kind of attention, and attention is a kind of relevance. What she got instead was the thing you give a person whose situation has passed beyond schadenfreude into something closer to a car accident. You look. Because you can't not look, but there's no pleasure in it. Only the low horror of watching and being glad it isn't you. The audience she'd performed the entire morning for gave her, at the end, not even the dignity of their satisfaction. The 3 who'd laughed were the clearest tell. If anyone had a reason to enjoy this, to feel that the universe had squared an account on their behalf, it was the people she'd made complicit an hour ago. But they weren't squaring anything. One had gone back to staring at the floor. One kept glancing at the exit like they wanted to be anywhere else. The third just watched with a flat, sober attention that had nothing in it but the private arithmetic of a person recalculating every interaction they'd ever had with her and finding a different total. The junior employee had unfolded his arms. He wasn't watching Victoria at all now. He was watching the room watch her, which is the more interesting thing to watch if you're the kind of person who ends up running places. He'd figured out early what was going to happen to the people in the middle of the floor. What he was studying now was what it did to everyone standing around the edges, how a whole building takes in the sight of authority coming apart. That's a more useful education than anything on his job description, and he was getting it for free. She stood in the middle of it with her chin up and took it. Derek, meanwhile, had finished his drift. He was standing several feet from Victoria now, not beside her, not near her, a careful distance that the whole room could measure by eye. He'd arrived at his final position, separate. A man who, an hour ago, had named this woman to the staff as the standard of the team, now standing far enough from her that no photograph could ever frame them as a pair. He didn't look at her. He was past the blame look now. That had been an action, and he was out of actions. This was just geography. His body had made its statement. Whatever this is, it's hers, and I'm standing over here. The room read the geography exactly as he meant it, and thought less of him for it than they had a minute ago, which I would not have believed was still possible. There's a particular cowardice that only shows up under a spotlight, and Derek was demonstrating the full range of it. In private, a man can abandon someone quietly, and no one keeps the receipt. In public, every inch of distance he put between himself and Victoria was witnessed, measured, and remembered. And he was too frightened to understand that the distancing hurt him more than staying would have. A man who'd stood beside her and said nothing would have looked loyal and foolish. A man who edged away looked like exactly what he was. He chose the version that looked worst, because fear doesn't optimize for dignity. It optimizes for the nearest empty foot of floor. I have seen that same reflex in boardrooms worth 1,000 of this one. The instinct to survive by subtraction, to make yourself smaller and quieter and further from the blast radius the instant the blast arrives. It is written deep in a certain kind of man, and it has never once saved him, because the room always remembers who stepped back. Years from now, when the details of this have blurred, that is the part they will still have exactly right. Not the screen, not the shoe, but the yard of empty floor a frightened man kept between himself and the person he had praised. Reputations are not built out of the big moments. They are built out of what your body does in the small ones, when you think the choice is too minor to be seen. Courage, in the end, is only the refusal to move your feet when moving them would be easier. It is a very small thing, and almost nobody has it. Derek had spent his whole life choosing the easier foot of floor, and the room got to watch him choose it one final time. And the empty floor was the whole story, really. An hour ago, these two had walked in together, half a step apart, a manager and the boss she was performing for, a partnership with a future. Now there was a widening gap of carpet between them that neither would cross. And the org chart glowed above them, showing their two little boxes side by side under Meridian, together on the screen. Separated on the ground, the picture and the truth finally disagreeing in public. Victoria felt the distance open beside her. She didn't reach across it. There was nothing on the other side of it to reach for. Her hand went to her pocket. Not the lanyard this time, the pocket. Her fingers found the access card through the fabric and closed around the shape of it, and held. She didn't take it out. She just held the outline of it, the small, hard rectangle that had opened every door in this building for however many years she'd been here. And I watched her feel the weight of a thing she was about to be asked to give back. The clock was somewhere under 2 minutes now. She knew it. You could see her know it in the way her hand rested on that pocket, not gripping, just keeping company with the last minutes of her belonging here. She looked up once, out across the lobby, and her eyes caught on something. A chair. One of the desk chairs near the central island had been pulled out slightly during the gathering an hour ago, pulled out for the stand-up, for the show, for the audience she'd assembled to watch her run the floor for Derek. Nobody had pushed it back in. It sat there at its small, careless angle, empty, waiting for a meeting that had happened and would never happen again the way it was supposed to. She looked at the chair for a second, then she looked away. That was all. She didn't say anything about it. Neither will I. Some objects don't need a caption. The empty chair pulled out for a triumph that turned into, "This is its own whole sentence," and adding words to it would only make it smaller. Somewhere in the building, a badge system was counting down without any drama at all. No alarm, no announcement, Just a line in a database that would flip from active to void at a specific second. And after that, the card in Victoria's pocket would be a rectangle of dead plastic, and the doors that had known her for years would simply stop knowing her. That's how institutions end a person, not with a scene, with a permissions change. The scene had been Victoria's contribution, the permissions change was mine, and mine was the one that lasted. She kept her hand on the pocket. She didn't check the time. I think she'd decided not to give the clock the satisfaction of being watched, a small, stubborn dignity, refusing to stand there counting down her own last minute like a woman waiting for a bus. If that was the choice, it was a good one. It was, maybe, the version of her that could have run a floor honestly, showing up 2 hours too late and one catastrophe too far to do her any good. The screen was still on above them. My name, my photo, the tree of boxes branching down to the 2 that would be empty by Friday. Rebecca stood at the edge of the lobby with the calm of a person who has done the loud part of her job and is now doing the quiet part, the transition. The paperwork, the conference B that was booked before any of them had a bad idea this morning. She caught my eye across the room and held it a moment. The smallest acknowledgement between two people who've done this before. And then she turned toward the HR corridor. Nobody had told the staff to move. Nobody had told Victoria and Derek to leave. The elevator was to my right, the lobby suspended behind me. 40 people standing in a room that had just watched its own morning come apart and hadn't been given permission to go back to their desks. I had permission. I was the one who granted it. But the walk hadn't started yet. There was still one more quiet minute where nothing moved. Victoria's hand on her pocket. Derek, marooned in his careful distance, the chair pulled out for no one. The screen throwing its light, the whole room held in the last still frame before the part where people finally, actually, have to move their feet and go. I let it hold. Then I turned toward the elevator. Part 7. The elevator was already there when I reached it. People read a thing like that as power, the doors standing open the instant you arrive, the building anticipating you. It isn't power, it's just calling ahead. But I'll admit there's a small, clean pleasure in a morning where every piece is where you left it. And the elevator sitting open at my floor was the last piece, waiting exactly where it was supposed to wait. Rebecca came with me as far as the threshold. Not into the car, she wasn't leaving. Her work was here, in the wing where the paperwork happens. In the conference B that had been booked before any of them had a bad idea today. She just walked me the last few feet, the way you see a colleague to a door. We didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that we hadn't already said years ago, in other lobbies, over other files. She looked at me and nodded once, small, precise, the whole of it contained in the tilt of her chin. I nodded back, smaller. 11 years fit into those two gestures with room to spare. That's what a real working relationship looks like at the end of a bad morning. Not a speech, not a thank you. One nod that says handled, one nod back that says I know, and then each of you goes to the next thing. That is what 11 years buys you, if you spend them on the right person. Not warmth, exactly. Something rarer and far more useful. The ability to hand someone the single most important moment of a morning with one glance and know. Without checking, that it will be carried exactly the way you would have carried it. I have more money than I will ever find a use for, and I would part with a great deal of it before I would part with the certainty in that nod. You can buy almost anything. You cannot buy the person who does not need to be told twice. She'd said exactly one word aloud in that lobby all morning. Done. And it had done more work than everything Derek managed to say combined. Some people are sentences. Rebecca is a period. There was one more thing in that nod, and only the two of us could read it. It said the timing had held. The display queued before I spoke. The elevator at the floor before I reached it. Conference B booked before the stand-up started. Legal in the doorway before the shoe came off the armrest. None of it was luck, and none of it was improvised. And the nod was Rebecca confirming that every gear I'd set turning weeks ago had turned exactly on schedule. People think an ambush like this is a stroke of genius in the moment. It's the opposite. It's the absence of anything happening in the moment. Everything had already happened, weeks earlier, in quiet rooms over documents nobody in this lobby had ever seen. The signatures, the file, the shortlist, the decision. All that was left for this morning was the confirmation, and Victoria had supplied it herself in the first 60 seconds. With a foot on an armrest and a line about who forgets what real work looks like. People imagine an ambush is a stroke of genius. It is almost always just homework, done early, by someone patient enough to wait for the room to arrive. Everything had already happened. This morning was just the invoice arriving. She stepped back to hold the lobby. I turned to face out from the elevator, and the doors did not close yet, because I wanted— no, that's not honest. I didn't want to watch. I didn't need to. But the car was open, and the lobby was in front of me, and the last thing the building showed me before it let me go was the walk beginning. Behind me, on my phone, the calendar was already open. Board call in 38 minutes. 2 personnel slots to fill by Friday. I noted both with the mild annoyance you'd give a double-booked afternoon, a scheduling cost, nothing heavier. I had known both replacement names before I ever walked through the side lobby this morning. That's the part nobody believes about a day like this. The hard decisions were made weeks ago, in quiet rooms, over documents. The only thing left to decide this morning was whether the man in the plain jacket would be handed a rag. He was. That was the last data point. Everything after it was just the building doing what buildings do. And out in the lobby, the two of them had started to move. Victoria first, or nearly, and here was the last thing Derek did that mattered, though it wasn't an action so much as a shape. He didn't walk beside her. He fell in slightly ahead, half a step, then a full one, the careful choreography of a man who wants no photograph. No camera angle, no future in which the two of them are framed as a pair. An hour ago they'd walked onto this floor together, half a step apart, a manager and the boss she was auditioning for. They were leaving it in that same formation with the meaning turned inside out. The half step that had been partnership was now abandonment. And everyone could see it, and he did it anyway. I watched Victoria walk, and I watched the staff watch her, and I understood that I was, in fact, the least important person in the lobby now. That was correct. That was the whole design. The consequence doesn't need the man who set it in motion standing over it. If it does, it isn't a consequence. It's just a beating. So I let the doors stay open one more second, and I let the walk take the room, and then I would go. Here is the walk, and I'll tell it plainly, because it doesn't need help. Victoria Shaw crossed the lobby toward the HR wing on the far side, and she did it on foot. In the open, in front of every person she had assembled that morning to watch her run the floor. There was no back stairwell for this. There was no quiet exit. The building she'd wanted to be seen ruling was going to see her leave it, and it was going to see all of her leave. Because a public floor gives you a public departure, whether you asked for one or not. She kept her head level. I'll say that for her again. She did not look at the ground, did not hunch, did not hurry into a scramble. She walked out the way a person walks when the only thing left to control is their own posture, and they have decided to control it completely. It was a long lobby, and there is no fast way across a long lobby when a floor is watching you cross it. That's the geometry of a public space. It was built to be seen through, all clean sightlines and open floor. The same design that had let Victoria stage her little show in the middle of it, now offering no wall to duck behind on the way out. She had chosen this room as her stage an hour ago. Rooms remember what you use them for. It was her stage still. She just wasn't the one running it anymore. She passed the central island where she'd propped her foot on the armrest. She passed the desks whose owners had gone still. She passed the printer where a woman had once frozen with a page half out of the tray. And the woman was standing now, watching, the page long since abandoned. Every few feet was a small monument to some moment of the morning she'd have given anything to take back. And she had to walk past all of them, in order, in the shoes. But she was wearing the shoes. The same shoes. Black leather, resoled once, cared for by a cobbler she trusted. The shoes she had lifted onto an armrest an hour ago and ordered a stranger to clean. The shoes I had knelt down and polished until the toe threw back the ceiling lights, because if you do a thing, you do it correctly. And now the leather caught the lobby's overhead lights with every step, a small, traveling shine. Moving across the floor, drawing the eye whether the eye wanted to look or not. She did not look down at them. She didn't have to. She could feel them on her feet, I think, more than she'd ever felt a pair of shoes in her life. The whole room looked down at them for her. The shine moved, and the eyes followed the shine, and nobody said a word. And the polish I'd put on that leather did more talking on the walk to HR than any sentence could have. I did not name it to myself. There's nothing to name. You put your foot up, you get the shine walks you out. The morning had a grammar, and it was finishing its own sentence. The staff watched her go, and this is the part I want to be exact about, because it is the true reckoning, and it has nothing to do with me. Not one of them was enjoying it. I'd worried a little that a room given this much permission would turn ugly, that somewhere a phone would come up, that someone would let out the small, cruel sound a crowd makes when the powerful fall. It never came. The floor watched Victoria Shaw walk out in the shoes she'd made a man polish, and the room's silence had no teeth in it at all. It was heavier than teeth. It was just witness. 40 people seeing a thing clearly and declining to decorate it. There was one man near the center island. I'd noticed him in the first minute. In the shoe scene, when he'd gone quiet and looked at the floor instead of laughing. He was looking at Victoria now with that exact same expression. Not satisfaction, not sympathy. He'd refused to perform an hour ago, and he was refusing to perform now. And the symmetry of it was its own small verdict. Some people don't change their face for the powerful or for the fallen. And those are usually the people worth keeping. Above them, the screen was still on. My name still sat at the top of it, the photo. The tree of boxes branching down to the two small ones marked Gallagher and Vance, 4 tiers below the top. Victoria walked beneath her own name on that screen, beneath the confirmation, in glowing corporate typeface. Of exactly where she stood and exactly who stood above her, and the screen did not so much as flicker. It just kept displaying the truth, patiently, the way the truth does when it has stopped being in a hurry. Derek was ahead of her the whole way, and the gap between them held. He reached the far corridor first and did not hold anything open, did not slow, did not glance back to see whether the woman he'd praised to the staff 4 days into his tenure was keeping up. The last thing the lobby learned about Derek Halloran was the back of him, moving fast, alone by choice. And that gap, the yard of empty floor he kept so carefully between himself and Victoria, was the last sentence the room needed. 4 days ago, he'd walked in beside her. He'd named her to the staff as the standard. He'd laughed first, before anyone, to co-sign her little show. Now he couldn't get away from her fast enough, and the distance he was working so hard to maintain announced, to everyone still watching, that his loyalty had a shelf life measured in minutes, and his courage had never existed at all. He thought he was escaping. He was just narrating himself on the way out. A man tells you everything about who he is by who he refuses to stand next to when the room turns. Victoria did not try to close the gap. She had learned, finally and completely, and about 90 minutes too late, what the space beside Derek Halloran was actually worth. She let him have his yard of floor. She walked her own walk, in her own shine, at her own pace. And if there was a version of her that might have run a floor honestly, it was this one, the one that showed up in the last 2 minutes, when there was nothing left to perform for. Off to the side, the junior employee watched the walk with his hands at his sides and his face doing the one thing his face did all morning, which was tell the truth. He'd known this was coming since the corridor, since the watch, since a servant said a CEO's first name flat and unafraid. Being right about it had given him no pleasure at all. That's the difference between the people who notice things and the people who enjoy them, and I'd already decided. Watching him, that he was going to get a phone call in about a week from someone he'd never expect to hear from. And then they were through the far doors, and the lobby was just a lobby again. Except that everyone in it had been changed by the last 20 minutes, and the room itself looked exactly the same. I heard, faintly, the memory of the only 2 orders Victoria had given all morning. "You, clean these!" And, "Some people forget what actual work looks like." She'd been right about that last part, in the end. Someone in that room had forgotten what actual work looks like. It just wasn't the man she'd said it to. I turned to face the inside of the elevator. Rebecca was already walking toward the HR wing, unhurried, a woman with a transition to run and all morning to run it. The staff were beginning, one by one, to remember they had desks. The doors had not closed yet. That was the last thing left to happen. But the walk was done, the lobby was continuing, and I was already, in every way that mattered, gone. Part 8. Here's the part nobody stages, because you can't. The part after. The far doors swung shut behind Victoria and Derek, and for a moment the lobby held its shape, 40 people standing where the confrontation had left them. The screen still glowing, the air still thick with what it had just carried. A room doesn't snap back from something like that. It thaws. The first person to move was nobody important, which is how it always goes. A woman near the windows realized she was still holding a coffee she'd stopped drinking 20 minutes ago, looked at it, and sat down at her desk, quietly, the way you rejoin a normal day you're not sure is still available to you. Then a man 2 rows over. Then, in ones and twos, the floor remembered it was a floor. And the silence broke the way silence always breaks, not with an announcement, with a whisper. "Did that actually just happen?" someone said low to the person beside them. Not really a question. The kind of sentence you say to confirm you and another human being witnessed the same impossible thing. "That was the chairman," the other one breathed back. That was the actual chairman. He was on the floor. She had him on the floor. I laughed, a third voice said, further off, sick with it. God, I laughed. That was the whole conversation, more or less, repeated in low pairs across the room. And I want to note what it was already becoming even before the screen was switched off. A story. Not an event anymore, a story. The kind that gets told at this company for years. At other companies after that, the shape of it hardening in real time. The man they made polish a shoe, the name on the screen, the walk. By lunch, it would have a title. By Friday, it would have a moral. That's what a building does with a morning like this. It converts it into memory. And memory is the only thing an institution truly keeps. One of the three, the man near the printers who'd gone pale when the screen came up, didn't go quiet back to his desk. He stood for a while at the edge of things. And I watched him have the specific bad morning of a person who has just learned something about himself he'd have preferred not to know. He hadn't done anything, technically. He'd laughed at a joke, that was all. But he'd laughed on cue for a man abusing his power, in a room where staying silent cost nothing. And now he had to carry the small, permanent knowledge that when the test came, he'd chosen the easy laugh. Nobody would ever mention it to him. He'd never forget it. That's usually punishment enough, and it's the only punishment those three would get, which is correct. They were symptoms, not the disease. The junior employee was the last to sit down. He stood a moment longer than anyone, and he did three things in order, and I know the order because I'd have done them in the same one. He looked at the screen, my name, my photo, the title, the tree of boxes. He looked at the far doors where Victoria had walked out. And then he looked at the empty middle of the lobby, the exact patch of floor where an hour ago a man had knelt with a rag, as if to fix the geography of it in his head. Then he went to his desk, sat, and, I'd put money on this, wrote himself a note that had nothing to do with his job and everything to do with what he just learned about how the world actually distributes power. Good. He'd need it where he was going. Somewhere in the building, at almost exactly this moment, a small, quiet thing happened that no one in the lobby saw, and it was the most final thing of the whole morning. Victoria's access card stopped working. I don't know which door she tried. It doesn't matter. Somewhere in the HR wing, she, or an escort, held a badge to a reader, the way you've done 10,000 times without thinking, and the little light went red instead of green, and the lock stayed locked. No alarm, no drama, just a permissions field somewhere flipping from true to false on a schedule that had been set before she ever propped her foot on that armrest. 4 minutes, I'd said. The building keeps better time than any threat. That's how institutions actually end a person. Not with a speech in a lobby, that part is theater. And the theater had been Victoria's idea, not mine. The real ending is a database. A red light on a card reader, a name coming off a distribution list, a parking spot reassigned by Thursday. It is astonishingly quiet, the machinery of removal, and it does not care in the slightest how good your performance was. You cannot charm it. You cannot out-talk it the way Derek had spent a career out-talking rooms full of people. There is no performance a card reader will accept in place of permission. That was the real distance between the world those two lived in and the world I actually run. One is built of impressions and audiences, and the other of fields that are either true or false and do not care how the morning felt. It only reads the field. The field said no. There is a mercy in that if you look for it, and a warning folded inside the mercy. The mercy is that the machinery does not gloat and does not hate. It simply stops recognizing you, the way a lock stops recognizing a key that has been quietly changed. The warning is that it will do exactly the same to anyone, eventually, including the people who feel safest inside it today. Every badge in that building was a temporary arrangement. Most people spend an entire career forgetting that, and then one ordinary Tuesday the little light goes red, and they remember all of it at once. By the end of the hour, there would be an email. There's always an email. 3 careful sentences from legal that don't explain anything and don't have to. The corporate equivalent of a door clicking shut down a long hall. Effective immediately. We thank them for their contributions. Please direct any questions to your department head. Nobody reading it would need the questions answered. They'd all been in the lobby. The email was just the paperwork catching up to the memory. 2 boxes on the internal directory would go gray within the day. The little status dot beside Gallagher and beside Vance, flipping from available to nothing. The way a light goes off in a window across a courtyard, and you understand, without being told, that whoever lived there has gone. Someone in IT would archive 2 mailboxes. Someone in facilities would collect 2 laptops. A building the size of this one has an entire quiet apparatus for unremembering a person. And it works whether you were beloved or whether you spent your last morning making a stranger kneel. The apparatus doesn't read character, it reads the field. I didn't need to be in Conference B to know how it was going in there. I've been in enough of them from the other side of the table. Rebecca would be running it exactly the way she runs everything. Flat. Correct. No cruelty and no comfort. A folder open, the necessary sentences said in the necessary order. There would be no shouting, because there was nothing left to shout at. Derek would try, one more time, to find the frame that made him the reasonable one. And it would land the way all his frames landed today, which is to say, nowhere. Victoria would be quiet. I suspected she'd be the more dignified of the two in that room, which is its own small tragedy. Because dignity, 2 hours too late, is just a person showing you who they could have been. And this is the thing I want to be honest about, because if you've watched this far, you deserve the truth of it. None of it made me feel powerful. I know that's not the fashionable thing to say. The story wants me to have relished it. But I have done this before, and I will do it again, and the feeling it produces in me is not triumph. It's the flat, tired satisfaction of a man who has removed a fault from a system before the fault could spread. Because that's what this was. Not revenge, a correction. I didn't lose anything in that lobby that I needed back. My dignity was never on the floor with that rag. You can't take a man's dignity by handing him a cloth. You can only reveal your own. I wasn't there to restore myself. I was there because Meridian was one of mine, and a company is a living thing. And a living thing can be poisoned quietly from the middle by exactly the two people who just walked out. A manager who mistakes cruelty for leadership, and an executive who mistakes an audience for a conscience. Left alone, that pairing metastasizes. It teaches the whole floor that the way up is through performance and flattery and the occasional public sacrifice of someone weaker. The three who laughed were the early symptoms. The junior employee going unheard at the back was another. I hadn't come to punish Victoria. I'd come to cut something out before it turned the rest of the room into more of her. The shoe was the test, and I'll tell you plainly what it tested. I don't trust how people behave when they know the boss is watching. Anyone can perform decency for a camera. I trust how they behave when they've decided no one who matters is in the room, when they think the quiet man in the plain jacket is nobody. And there's a weaker person in front of them, and an audience worth impressing. That is the only honest audit there is. Victoria took it this morning without knowing it was being given, and she failed it in the first 60 seconds. On her own, with a foot on an armrest and a sentence about who forgets what real work looks like. I hadn't made her do any of it. That's the part I keep coming back to. I walked into a building in a 6-year-old jacket and stood at the edge of a room. And the room told me everything. And the only thing I contributed was the patience to let it finish talking. This is why I still do the walkthroughs myself, at my age, at my level. When I have a dozen people who'd happily do them for me with clipboards and advance notice. Advance notice is the enemy of the truth. The second a floor knows the chairman is coming, it performs. And a performance tells you nothing except how good the floor is at performing. So I come in, plain, unannounced, as nobody. And I watch how people treat the nobody. It's the cheapest, most reliable instrument I own, and it has never once been wrong. Meridian's floor had been failing the test quietly for a while. I'd seen it in the numbers, in the turnover, in the shape of the complaints that reached my desk. I just needed to see the failure with my own eyes before I signed the correction. Victoria was kind enough to demonstrate it in the first 60 seconds, at full volume, with props. And the two names that would fill those gray boxes by Friday, I already had them. And neither of them would ever put a foot on an armrest, because I'd chosen them for exactly the trait Victoria and Derek lacked. Not brilliance, not charisma. The plain, unglamorous decency of people who treat the mailroom the way they treat the boardroom. Because they haven't got two different faces to switch between. That decency doesn't win auditions. It just runs companies that are still standing in 10 years. The floor was about to get a manager who'd never make anyone kneel. And most of them would never know how close they'd come to spending years under someone who would have. Out on the floor, a manager 2 departments over had quietly started doing what managers do in a vacuum. Checking on people. Keeping the ordinary machinery running, because the ordinary machinery is what survives mornings like this. The whiteboard on the far wall still had last week's missed targets ghosted across it. The birthday balloon still drooped from its chair. The company was already, in 100 tiny reflexive ways, continuing. And that, the continuing, was the actual point. The thing I'd walked in for that no thumbnail or headline would ever capture. Not the shoe, not the screen, not the walk. Those were the loud parts, and the loud parts were mostly Victoria's doing. What I'd come for was this: a floor that could go back to work under someone who wouldn't rot it. The people quietly returning to their desks were the whole return on the morning. Most of them would tell the story wrong for years. Chairman humiliates cruel manager. The tidy revenge version, and I'd never bother to correct them, because the version that mattered wasn't a revenge at all. It was maintenance. A building has to be cleaned, and the ugliest cleaning is the kind you do to the people. And I'd rather be the man who does it plainly than leave it for the rot. Rebecca would be nearly through the transition paperwork by now. In a day, she'd have the replacement announcements drafted. In a week, the new names would be in the gray boxes. In a month, this floor would be running so smoothly that the newest hires wouldn't believe the story when they finally heard it. That's how it should go. The best correction is the one that stops being visible. Someday, the only proof any of this happened will be a junior analyst, promoted twice, telling a room full of his own people about the morning he watched the chairman kneel and telling them the right lesson, which is the one nobody in this building learned quickly enough. Watch what people do when they think the powerful aren't looking. That's the only resume that counts. And the screen was still on. Nobody had turned it off. My name still sat at the top of the lobby wall, throwing its pale light over a floor slowly filling back up with the sound of keyboards. And it would keep sitting there until someone in facilities remembered to take it down, which, I already suspected, nobody would be in a hurry to do. I was still in the elevator. The doors were still open. In front of me, the lobby was becoming a lobby again, one keystroke at a time, and there was nothing left in it that needed me, which meant it was time to let the doors do the last thing doors do. Part 9. I checked the time one more time. Board call in 38 minutes. 38 minutes, a car downstairs, and 2 boxes on a directory that would need filling. And the only thought that surfaced, standing there at the end of a morning that had just ended 2 careers, was this: 38 minutes. I'm going to need a better coffee. That's it. That's the whole interior of the man you've been watching. Not a swell of victory, not a speech I was composing for the elevator mirror, a logistics problem, and a complaint about the coffee. I'd known this was how the morning would end since before it began, so there was no adrenaline left to spend on it. And what fills the space where the drama should be is astonishingly ordinary. A meeting. A commute, a mediocre cup of coffee I'd been quietly resenting since the lobby. People imagine the man at the top feels these moments the way an audience feels them. He doesn't. If he did, he'd be no good at it. The whole reason I can do this cleanly is that the part of me that would enjoy it went quiet years ago. And what's left just wants to make the 11 o'clock and find a machine that does espresso properly. If there's a lesson in me at all, it isn't a triumphant one. It's just that the people who need you to watch them win are already telling you they can be beaten. And the people who don't need you to watch are the ones you should never turn your back on. I've been the second kind my whole life. It is not as satisfying as the movies promise. It is only, reliably, effective. People want the man at the top to be a monster or a saint, because both are easier to look at than the truth, which is duller and stranger than either. He is mostly just a man who stopped needing the room's approval a long time ago and got quietly. Relentlessly good at the work that stops requiring it. There is no music in it. There is no speech at the end where he explains himself to the people who were wrong about him. There is a plain jacket, a long memory, a decent cup of coffee if he can find one, and the patience to let people show you exactly who they are before you decide what the building is going to do about it. I pressed the button for the lower level, and I did not look back. The doors began to close, and for one narrow second, the lobby was framed in the shrinking gap between them, the org chart still glowing on the wall. My name at the top of it. The staff settling back into their desks. Rebecca, a small gray figure moving toward the HR wing with a building's worth of paperwork to close. 1 second of it. The whole morning held in a closing rectangle. I let it close. I didn't lean to catch a last look at Victoria's empty middle of the floor. Didn't watch the screen one more time. Didn't do any of the things a man does when he needs the moment to mean something to him. It already meant what it meant. Looking back wouldn't have added to it. It would only have been a performance, and I'd watched enough performances for one day. That's the whole grammar of it, in the end, the not looking back. Victoria had spent her morning performing for an audience, arranging her cruelty so it would land, checking every few seconds whether Derek was watching. Derek had spent his 4 days performing authority for a room he needed to believe in him. Everything they did for eyes. And the last image the building would have of the man who ended them both was his back, turned, not needing to see it, already reading an agenda. You cannot outperform a man who is never performing. That's not a strategy you can copy. It's just the difference between someone who wants to be seen winning and someone who only wants the thing done. The doors closed on the ones who needed an audience. I never did. That was the whole of it, stripped down to the one line the story never keeps. Not the ownership, not the screen, not even the patience, though the patience helped. Just that I had walked into that building not needing a single person in it to watch me win. And they had walked in needing everyone to watch them at every second. In a straight contest between a man who needs the room and a man who does not, the man who does not wins every time he is willing to wait. I am always willing to wait. I think, in the end, that was the only real advantage I ever had over either of them. Bigger than the ownership, bigger than the screen. I simply didn't need the room to see it. The doors met, the lobby was gone. And I was alone in a steel box, descending, already somewhere else. I opened the board deck on my phone. This is the part that would ruin the story for anyone who wanted it to be about Victoria. Because by the time the elevator passed the 4th floor, I wasn't thinking about Victoria at all. I was reading an agenda. The 11 o'clock had 6 items on it, and none of them were named Shaw or Halloran, and 4 of them were, frankly, more difficult than anything that had happened upstairs, a supplier renegotiation that had been sideways for a month, a regional number that wasn't going to hit, a hiring freeze somebody wanted lifted in a market where I didn't want it lifted. The morning I'd just spent had been, in the accounting of my actual day, one small line item resolved before 10 a.m. Handled. Next, I flagged the 2 personnel slots for the secretary. 2 lines, Meridian, department manager, and Meridian, chief executive, both effective today. Both to be filled from the shortlist already sitting in a folder I'd built weeks ago. I added a note to move the replacement announcements up. Sooner is kinder to a floor than later. A floor left without a name at the top starts inventing its own anxieties. That was the entire administrative residue of the whole affair. 2 lines and a scheduling preference. It's almost insulting how little space the end of a person's career takes up in the paperwork of the person who ended it. But I've stopped pretending it's otherwise. Pretending would just be another performance, and I'm the man who came here to end those. The mild annoyance I felt wasn't about them. It was about the timing. 2 openings I now had to staff cleanly on a week that was already full. A Tuesday made slightly more expensive than I'd planned. Not regret. You don't regret cutting out rot, you just note the labor of it. I noted the labor and moved to the next agenda item, which was the supplier. Which actually kept me up at night in a way that a manager with her foot on an armrest never would. Somewhere around the 3rd floor, I caught my own reflection in the brushed steel of the doors, the plain jacket, the flat face, the man a whole building had spent a morning deciding was nobody. Good, it still worked. Tomorrow it would work on some other floor, in some other building. On some other manager who'd learned all the wrong lessons about who deserves respect. The jacket is 6 years old for a reason. A camouflage you replace is a camouflage that stopped working. And mine has never once stopped working, because people will always mistake quiet for weak. It's the most dependable blind spot in the species. I've built a career in it. Here's what I left behind me, and I can tell it to you, even though I didn't turn to see it. Because I've left 100 rooms this way, and they all continue the same. The lobby went back to being a lobby. The keyboards found their rhythm. Somebody, eventually, would make a joke. A small, nervous one. The first laugh after a funeral. The sound of a room giving itself permission to be normal again. The screen stayed on above them, patient. My name in corporate type at the top of a tree that no longer had Victoria or Derek hanging live from its branches. Facilities would take it down eventually. Not today. Today it would just keep glowing over a floor of people who would never look at that wall the same way again. The chair was still pulled out. The one from the central island, dragged a few inches from its desk during the stand-up. Angled for a meeting that had happened and would never happen again the way it was meant to. Nobody pushed it back in. It sat there through the whole aftermath at its small, careless angle, empty. And it would sit there until someone tidying up at the end of the day rolled it back without a thought. Not knowing it had been, for one morning, the most honest piece of furniture in the building. I'm not going to tell you what it meant. It's a chair. It meant what an empty chair means. The junior analyst, back at his desk, opened a blank note and typed 1 line into it. I don't know what. I wasn't there. And it's his to keep. Then he closed it and went back to work, a young man with the right eyes at the wrong pay grade, who did not yet know that in about a week he'd get a call from an assistant he'd never met. On behalf of a chairman he'd watched kneel, offering him a conversation that would change the shape of his career. He'd earned it by doing nothing at all, by being the one person in a room of 40 who watched honestly and refused to laugh. In my experience, that's the rarest and most promotable trait there is. Rebecca would work the transition until it was clean, and then she'd go back to her own floor, her own files, the next quiet thing. And the two of us wouldn't speak of this morning again because there'd be nothing to say about it that a nod hadn't already covered. That's the whole luxury of the right people. You don't have to debrief. It's handled. It's always handled. The woman by the printers would pick up the page she'd abandoned an hour ago and finish the thing she'd been doing before any of this started. Because that's what most people do. They carry their small task through the wreckage and out the other side. And the small tasks are what keep a company alive between the mornings that make the stories. The manager 2 departments over would keep the floor moving. The birthday balloon would droop a little lower. The coffee would still be bad. And by mid-afternoon, if you walked onto that floor cold, you'd never guess that anything had happened there at all. Except maybe for a certain carefulness in how people spoke to each other, a courtesy that hadn't quite been there yesterday. Fear does that for a few weeks. Then it fades, and what you hope is left underneath it is something better than fear. The plain knowledge that the quiet ones might be anyone. So you might as well be decent to all of them. That lesson never lasts as long as I'd like. But it lasts a while, and a while is something. And the building kept the story the way buildings do. Not as an event, as a warning, passed down through the staff in lowered voices for years. The morning the quiet man in the plain jacket turned out to own the place. They'd tell it as a revenge, because revenge is the version that's easy to tell. Only a few of them would ever understand it was something colder and more useful than that. A correction. A fault cut out of a system before it could spread. A building cleaned by the one man in it who could look like nobody long enough to see the truth. And me? I'd go to the 11 o'clock and argue about a supplier and lose 1 item and win 3. And by evening, Meridian's bad morning would be 4 items down in a day that had gone on to contain 15 more. That's the thing about running things at the size I run them. No single morning is allowed to be the whole story, not even a good one, not even this one. There's always a supplier. There's always a number that won't hit. There's always another building with another quiet rot in the middle of it, waiting for a plain jacket to walk in unannounced and stand at the edge of the room and watch. I have a dozen of them, if I'm honest, companies under the Aldridge roof. Each one a living thing that can be poisoned from the inside by the wrong person given too much rope. I can't visit them all. I visit the ones the numbers whisper about, the way the numbers had whispered about Meridian. And I visit them as nobody, and I let the floor tell me the truth it would never tell the chairman. Most floors pass, genuinely. Most people, when they think no one important is watching, are just tired and decent and trying to get through the day. That's the part the revenge stories always leave out. How often the audit finds nothing wrong. How many quiet, good people are out there being quietly good for no audience at all? Those are the visits nobody makes a story about. This just wasn't one of them. The elevator slowed. The number changed. Somewhere above me, a floor was learning how to breathe again, without 2 people it should never have been asked to hold. And somewhere below me, a car was waiting. And a board was waiting. And the next problem, because there is always a next problem, was already forming in the space this one had just vacated. The doors opened on a different floor. I stepped out, checked the time again, and went to find a decent cup of coffee before the call.